Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jaylene Ippolito. I'm the Marketing Specialist with Project Line. Today we have our Relationship Manager, Rob Peterson-Wakeman, here to go over enhancements to company branches and fixed assets in version 9.1. Just to note that all participants are in listen-only mode, so if you have a question at any point throughout the webinar, you can type it into the questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer all questions at the end. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website and YouTube channel later today. We'll include a link to the video and a follow-up email that you'll all receive tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks to everyone who voted in the poll that we just ran. I think we're going to do another one later on in the session, so just watch for that. And with that, I will pass it over to Rob and we can get started.
Thanks, Jaylene. Can everybody hear and see me? Jaylene, maybe I'll just check with you really quick. I think you can see the screen and hear me. Okay, wonderful. And then if at any time, I think, Jaylene, you'll be watching for questions and for chat. If you have a question,
I will.
Please enter it in, yeah. And, you know, Jaylene will be watching the questions, so if I don't stop right away, she'll make sure that they get answered or that we can get an answer to you at some point. So just looking at the results of the poll. So today's webinar is really just kind of introducing you to some of the changes that have happened within fixed asset management and multi-branch functionality. Later we'll ask the question whether or not you're using fixed assets. Of course, that particular question as it applies to multi-branch is a bit moot because multi-branch is a new function. So we'll see sort of how that affects your Business One system. And you know, the focus of today's webinar is really to make you aware of this functionality, to kind of uncover, you know, the major things that you need to prepare for and why you might use it, and then, you know, put you on to further training, because both of these modules will require further training from you on the SAP Business One Academy. So we certainly can't perform all of that training today. All right, so what will we be doing today? So we'll be taking a look at what the enhancements are, kind of getting an overview of what's been changed. We'll steer you in the right direction as far as kind of where you can get started and where you can find information on switching these functionalities on and starting to use them. And then we'll give you a quick tour of where in Business One you're going to find some of these things, you know, where they're going to be effective. So as always, if you're trying out new functionality in Business One, we would encourage you to do so in a backup or test database. And if your company isn't used to using a backup or test database, you can certainly talk to our support consultants, and they can help. It's not a very time-consuming thing. They can help you get a test database set up, and it's often the best way to test new functionality. For instance, both fixed assets and multi-branch, once they're enabled on the system, you can't unenable them. So best to test them in a test environment. Okay, so first off, we're gonna take a look at the multiple branches functionality. So this is new to SAP Business One version 9.1, and I think the demo system that I'm running today, I'm at patch level 4, and so it's there in 9.1 at the first patch level and throughout. So if you have 9.0, you don't quite have multiple branches yet. Just looking at the poll, I'm noticing that, you know, most people indicated that they were interested in multiple branches so they could kind of separate and analyze financial performance, or, you know, do more than one of these things, like track inter-branch transactions, or even as a security feature to keep users within a certain, kind of keep user transactions within a certain branch. That can be done as well. Okay, so what are some of the enhancements that come with the product because of multiple branches? So essentially what you're switching on is you're switching on a module in Business One now, or a functionality that allows you to define multiple branches, and that branch functionality shows up in places. So, you know, you're now able to define, you know, what business partners are used in certain branches, and even what accounts are used in what branches as well, and we'll see some of that coming up right away. Okay. Okay, so we have the ability to create transactions for separate branches, and we can do it all within one database. So prior to the multi-branch functionality, if you wanted to kind of maintain two separate entities, you were likely looking at the SAP Business One intercompany solution, which meant that you would run separate company files, and you would run transactions to do things between companies. You could do things like share master data and share inventory. Now the only reason to really do that, to go the route of SAP intercompany, is when you have different legal entities that must, absolutely 100% must be maintained separately, or are companies that are in different regions, so different localizations of Business One. So an example of that would be if you've got a company in Canada and a company in South Africa, the intercompany functionality would be necessary to bridge those gaps, because the different regional versions of Business One have different fiduciary requirements for those regions. Okay, so now we can do centralized stock management. We can break it down per branch. Bank transactions can be managed from the same database with centralized payment capability. So you can do a transaction in one branch, but you can indicate which branch actually does the payments. Oh, pardon me. Financial transactions can be separated by branches. So once multi-branch is switched on, the default behavior is to take any existing transactions and existing master data and put it in the default branch. But it will be up to you to then choose, what other branches you have and where, various bits of master data will reside in one branch. You do have an option to have a different document numbering scheme per branch. So if you'd like your document numbers, like your sales orders, to be numbered 1 through infinity in branch number 1, but also 1 through infinity for branch number 2, so that you can understand, invoice number 533 in branch 1 and 533 in branch 2. You do have that option, and then there are some best practices around how you would deploy that. You may not just use a simple number. You may also use part of a code that indicated that it was from that branch, but you do have that capability. And you do have the ability to separate accounting setup, so GL accounts per branch. And I'll show you where the branch selector is on the GL accounts now. Right, and customer receivables aging and vendor liabilities can be done by branch, and you have the possibility to assign branches to certain business partners. So in the case of the last feature, if you had a certain vendor that was only required for a certain branch, that vendor can be specified against one branch. So it'll make a little more sense once we kind of take a look at the system itself. Okay, so obviously the benefits to this is we can manage business by branches. We can see the financial reporting or the financial performance of different branches, and but we can keep everything together in one database. We're not having to create separate databases with separate inventory records, etc. Okay, so when it comes to getting started with multiple branches, here's really where you want to go on the Business One Academy, and I want to do I kind of want to, this is the part we want to dive into really deeply today, because obviously there's not enough time to train on multi-branch in its entirety. I want to make sure everybody knows where they can go for additional help. So if we open this link up, and there we go. So we'll launch the page. This is the link to the SAP Business One Academy for the multi-branch functionality. If you were kind of launching it directly, it would take you right to here. We can actually, I'll just go back one level just to show you where this resides. So we'll go back to the Business One Academy main page, and on the main page we've got overview. Most people don't hang out in the overview if they're past the basic training, but logistics and accounting, and if I click into accounting, here are the major topic areas, and you can see that fixed assets and multiple branches are listed in the table of content. So if I click down into multiple branches, boom, I'm right there. So this is the recorded presentation that you should watch if you're interested in setting up multiple branches. It'll take you through step by step what's required in setting up, setting up the system so that multiple branch functionality, is switched on, and then it'll also talk more about how multi-branches affects, master data, how it affects GL accounts, how it affects transactions. And then there are some simulations that are available here for you to kind of look and see some business cases in the use of multi-branches. So I encourage everybody to go to the Business One Academy and go through this training and perhaps have your test system up and running so that you can kind of try some of these things out as you watch the video. That's typically how I prepare for some of these webinars. I'll be watching the training videos, and I'll be trying this out in the system as the video is kind of going step by step. Okay. So back to our presentation. So let's take a look at the actual multi-branch functionality. So how do we switch this on? So here we have SAP Business One 9.1. We're in patch level 4, I believe. And if I go into modules, where I'm going to go is I'm going to go into system initialization and company details. And the basic initialization tab is already selected, and that's where I want to be. Okay, and then you see in the basic initialization, now again, not everybody has access to this particular area, so you may have to talk to your administrator, but this is where a lot of the high level options for the system are engaged, and you can see that some of these options are selected and they're grayed out. This means that this was an option that was selected when the system was first initialized, and you can't go back. So if we look down, this particular database is using segmentation. In this area here, you see we're using perpetual inventory, and we're managing item cost by warehouse. This is actually a requirement of using the multi-branch functionality in Business One, is that you're managing your item cost by warehouse. So if you're not doing that, I encourage you to go through the demo videos. There's an explanation on why that's the case, but you have to be managing your item cost by warehouse if you're to use the multiple branches. If we go a little further down, you can see here's the enable fixed assets flag and enable multiple branches, and because I've switched it on, it's grayed out. I now can't go back. So again, a good thing to do in your test database first. Now that we have that switched on, if we take a look in the financials module, in the administration module, under setup and financials, we now have a menu item called branches. And if we click into that branches, here is where we define our branch setup. Okay, so we had a main branch that was initiated for us when we set up the system. This line here that is grayed out that says main, the system comes with a default system branch, which is sort of like a placeholder until such time you set up your main branch and your other branches. This is really meant to capture the default position of thing until you get these other things going. So with our main branch, we've got a name. We've indicated it as a main branch. We can flag whether the branch is active or disabled. So later, if you had a branch and then that branch, I went on vacation for a while, or who knows why we'd want to disable a branch, we click that flag. We also need to select defaults. So here's where we would select the default warehouse. And many of you may not be familiar with this already, but of course in 9.1 we have the idea of resources. So we actually also select a default resource warehouse idea. So this is the warehouse from which our resources come from if we're using resources in our workflow. The other thing I should call your attention to is the default customer ID and vendor ID. These are the business partners that you'll set up that allow you to do inter-branch transactions. So, you know, if we were doing a transaction between the main branch and branch number 2, and it was a inventory transfer or a sale of inventory, of course there would be a sales or an AR transaction from the main branch side, a purchasing or AP transaction from the subsidiary branch side, and these are the business partners that will control that. So we would set that up here. Other things, of course, we add things like addresses and whatnot into the branches. But what's absolutely required is to set up the warehouse IDs and the name, and you're ready to go. Okay, and what are some of the areas that are impacted by multiple branch? Well, one of the areas initially would be the chart of accounts. So if we take a look at the chart of accounts, and we can look at any account here, let's say we click on cash in hand, and we click on account details, notice now that there's a selector that allows us to select which branch this account is for. By leaving this unselected, this account could be used against any of the branches, is the understanding. Okay, so that's how chart of accounts are impacted. Another area that's impacted by multi-branch would be the business partners. So we can actually limit what business partners are used in particular branches. So if we find, you know, this particular business partner here, notice how now there is a new area here that says branch assignment on the business partner, and we've got a ... Now we can decide which branches this business partner is active in. And notice how this isn't a drop down. We're able to actually select which branches the business partner is available to, which means we can restrict. We can restrict the activity, the account activity for that business partner to just certain branches. Okay. Remember how before we were talking about the fact that we could restrict certain users to branches? So if we go into the setup, general users area, and we're going to find our manager user. Okay, so this is our user in the system that we're logged in as. Notice now that there's a branch assignment button, and if we click that ... again, we're able to assign which branches this user has access to, which means that if I'm a user in the the branch number 2 or one of the subsidiary branches, and you want to limit my activity to transactions that are only posted against that branch, you do so here. Okay. And lastly, and again, there's quite a lot that's impacted by multi-branch, so again, we don't have the time to cover everything, but let's take a look at a marketing document. Okay. Notice now for this particular AR invoice that there is a branch indicator here. So as a user, if I was assigned to a certain branch, it would default to that branch on the marketing document. Likewise, if the customer was restricted to a transaction, like if the business partner was only restricted to a certain branch, it would default to that branch on this marketing document. And this is what drives the branch allocation of transactions for later financial performance reporting. Okay. So I don't know, Jaylene, at this time if there's any questions related to the multiple branches.
None so far, Rob.
Okay, sounds good. And like I say, I really encourage you, that's really just the primer. I encourage everybody to go to the Business One Academy, review the recorded presentation for kind of an in-depth, you can kind of follow it along and you can try these things in the working example. All right, fixed assets. So Jaylene, could you run that second poll? And if we could get everybody to vote. We're curious to know who's using fixed assets and who isn't. Take a second there to vote in this poll. I know the election season has been long and arduous, so thank you for your participation in yet another poll. Hopefully this is an easy question to answer. give it another moment or two. So
Yeah.
with the fixed assets module, we now have some expanded abilities. Fixed assets came about in version 9.0. So again, our purpose today is really to review some of the changes, but I suspect that there are customers here today that may not even be using fixed assets. So just to just as by way of a bit of a primer to give everybody appreciation for what fixed assets has the ability to do. Here's sort of the high level workflow of what's possible in fixed assets. Of course, you can define a fixed asset within Business One. We can activate it, so we can capitalize a fixed asset by purchasing it and creating a capitalization document against it, and that sort of establishes its capitalization date. We can then, of course, depreciate the asset. So if the asset was originally $10,000 to buy, and over time, of course, its book value diminishes, we can run depreciation against that asset according to whatever schema that makes sense for our business. And we, of course, do need to stress that the fixed assets training is not a replacement for what should be best practice when it comes to fixed assets management. Obviously, you have to speak to your accountant, or for those of you who are accountants, there are some rules that you'll determine they follow accounting rules, not Business One rules. Other adjustments, so things like transferring of fixed assets or evaluation or even appreciation. If an asset increases in value, those are possible with the fixed assets module. And then retirement, eventually, depending on what happens to that asset, maybe we have the opportunity to sell it, so we can actually put that asset on an AR document, and that's logged against the asset itself, or maybe it just goes the way of the dodo. So what are some of the enhancements to fixed assets? So the functionality previously existed in 9.0, and in 9.1 we've added a few things. So cost center information is now supported. When you're retiring an asset and you're putting it on an AR document, we can have a cost center associated with that AR retirement transaction. And the cost center and project information will automatically be populated on that AR marketing document from the fixed asset master data. So that's sort of nice. You now have the ability to cancel depreciation runs. So whereas before, once you started a run, it was sort of off and away, and we couldn't necessarily cancel that. So now that ability is there. And then transfers within an asset class. And here's something where if you've got a question about how this impacts you, I might have to refer to it to a higher power. But just so that you know, possibility to select between 0 out postings and no postings for assets. Okay. The other thing to mention is that we can also there are impacts. There is interplay between the multi-branch and the fixed assets management as well. Okay. Again, like the as in the multiple branches, there is a good section in the Business One Academy on fixed assets management. So, Jaylene, what were the results of our poll?
We had 80% of the attendees voted, 25% said yes, and 75% no.
Okay, perfect. So I suspect there's many of you out there that's really just interested in understanding how to use fixed assets. This is a dynamite place to start. So you can see that fixed assets was released in the 9.0 version, and there's a lot of content on the site here. The best one to start off with would be this first recorded presentation on fixed assets. It really sort of takes you through the high level of the fixed assets workflow or life cycle. And then it gets down quite a bit more into some of the advanced settings that are possible with fixed assets. Again, if you have a demo system at your disposal, you can sort of be watching these videos. There's more to learn here, so again, I would encourage you to start at the top, and if you learn what you need to learn, in the top level videos and you can apply it, then that's great. You may not need to dive down quite as far. Just just to kind of give people a sense for how long these videos are, I think that this particular recorded video is about 16 minutes. They'll typically vary in length between 15 and 30 minutes. So you can see here, if we've got 3 or 4 videos here, 3 or 4 videos here, you know, this can represent anywhere from a few hours to a couple of days worth of training content here. Okay, so back to our presentation. So as with the multiple branch setup, I think we've already sort of seen where this is initialized. So again, if we go to administration, system initialization, company details, and on that basic initiation tab, here we've got enable fixed assets. You also have the ability to choose whether you're calculating your depreciation by month or by day. This is kind of at this high level. Once this is switched on, you now have a module within the financial section, a folder called fixed assets, and you know, a number of different functions that have to do with, you know, fixed asset management, like the capitalization, the transfer, either setting up depreciation runs or even doing manual depreciations, and then of course, you know, revaluation or retirement of an asset. So very quickly, we'll just go to taking a look at the asset master data. I think in this database we have one asset specified. For those of you who have worked with the item master before, this will look awfully familiar. This form really is very similar to that to that inventory master record, with the major difference of this tab here, which is the fixed assets tab. And we can see here that we have the ability to set up this fixed asset, put it in a certain class, understand it with respect to its depreciation area, and so on and so forth. So again, you know, there's a fair amount of setup that's required with fixed assets, but certainly by going through the training content, it's certainly not something that you shouldn't be able to tackle on your own in a test system. Okay, so we have data as it relates to kind of the overview of the asset. If we had values and depreciation happening for the asset, that's where you know, we'd have values kind of all in here, and you know, here's a depreciation schedule here as well. Now we can see on this particular tab, when it comes to cost center accounting, we now have the ability to handle the assignment to a project or a distribution rule for an asset. So these are some of the enhancements that were mentioned in the opening slides there. If we populate this data, like let's say we allocate this particular fixed asset to a you know, a certain project code, it will then populate a marketing document with this data automatically. And I don't know if we have a distribution rule assigned, but you can see here that we're able to set up what branch this particular asset belongs to, so on and so forth. Okay. Right. And you can see that the date range that this data is valid from is required before we add it to the system. If we leave valid to open, then it's assuming that it's just valid on a go-forward basis. Okay. You can see that the asset, like the inventory items, is available to select in a marketing document. So in this particular case, we may want to add this item to an AR invoice because we were retiring the asset by selling it. And you can see that the branch data that this asset belongs to is automatically populated. And it looks like we don't have the We don't have the project code automatically turned on, so we'll go in our form settings and we'll turn that on. But you can see the project that we specified in the asset master data is automatically added to the document. Okay, those are really kind of a highlight of the changes that have happened in the fixed asset module. So any questions, I guess, about fixed asset management at this time, Jaylene? Do you see any?
Nothing's come in yet, but we can give it a minute here.
Okay.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, this was obviously kind of a whirlwind tour, and Rob touched on all the highlights really well. If there's anything that you want to come back and review, we'll make that easy for you and have the recording of the session up on our website later today. So as I mentioned, we'll be sure to get that link out to you so you have access to it. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any questions so far. You know, if you have any questions after the session today, by all means, email myself or Rob and we can help you out. So I'll just say thanks to Rob for a great presentation. Oh, we just had one question come in. How do we do depreciation of fixed assets?
Excuse me. Yeah, right. So depreciation, and sorry, just to test, you can still see my screen here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Depreciation of fixed assets is done either according to a schedule, a depreciation run, or it's done manually. So you have two options here within Business One regarding how to do the depreciation. Again, it wasn't the intent of this webinar today to train you on how to do the depreciation runs. So I would encourage you to view the videos. Here's where you would find that functionality. And you can see here in the depreciation runs that we've set up. So we've got depreciation areas defined. We can do a preview of what the run will look like, and if we're ready to do the run, we hit execute. Again, there's a lot of setup behind setting up this depreciation run, and obviously depending on how your company works, like if you do straight line depreciation or declining balance or what have you, a lot of setup back there. So yeah, for the person that asked the question, we're definitely happy to help you out. It's just probably more than what we can handle in the course of today's webinar.
Doesn't look like we have any other questions. So again, thanks to Rob, and thank you to everyone for attending. Just to note that when the session ends, you'll see a short survey display in your browser window. If you can take a couple minutes to fill that in and just let us know how we did today and what you'd like to see in future webinars, we'd appreciate the feedback. And also our next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 21st, and we'll be continuing on with version 9.1 enhancements, this time looking at resources, production, and MRP. So keep an eye on your email in the next week or so for more details on that, and we hope to see you again in October.